Jake Morrison adjusted his tie for the 15th time in 10 minutes, which would have been perfectly normal behavior for any civilian diplomat attending their first interstellar peace summit. Too bad Jake had orchestrated the siege of New Damascus and could field strip a plasma rifle blindfolded. The tie wasn't nerves, it was the neural suppression implant behind his left ear firing warning shots every time his military training tried to surface. Representative Morrison, Ambassador Cathera's voice slithered through the translation matrix with all the warmth of liquid nitrogen. The Zephyrian's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Jake's combat training immediately cataloged as either confusion or mild contempt. Probably both. Your species continues to fascinate us with your unique diplomatic protocols. Jake smiled the practiced smile of someone who definitely hadn't spent the last decade perfecting the art of psychological warfare. How so, Ambassador? The space station's observation deck stretched before them, a crystalline dome offering a view of the Nexus Nebula that would have been breathtaking if Jake's enhanced tactical awareness wasn't automatically calculating firing angles and defensive positions. 300 billion stars, and his brain was treating them like a goddamn chessboard. In 700 years of galactic diplomacy, Cathera continued, her translator struggling with what Jake assumed was either incredulity or species-specific sarcasm. Earth remains the only civilization to attend peace summits without a single military representative. No generals, no admirals, no warriors of any kind. Just civilians. The implant pulsed again, harder this time. Jake's left hand twitched toward his hip where his sidearm would have been if he were being honest about who he was. Instead, he clasped his hands behind his back like a proper diplomat and nodded thoughtfully. We believe civilian perspectives bring clarity to peaceful solutions, he recited, the words tasting like recycled air and diplomatic bullshit. Military minds tend to complicate negotiations. Across the room, General Vextor of the Hegemony snorted through his breathing apparatus, the sound like a garbage disposal eating rocks. The massive, crab-like alien had been introduced as the military strategic advisor to the Hegemony delegation, because apparently every other species in the galaxy was perfectly comfortable letting their warriors help broker peace. Curious philosophy. Vextor clicked, his mechanical voice carrying an edge that made Jake's combat instincts scream warnings, especially from a species that has never lost a defensive war. The compliment hit Jake like a perfectly aimed psychological operation, which it probably was. The implant fired again, sending a sharp spike of pain through his skull as his suppressed memories tried to surface. Fragments of tactical briefings, casualty reports, the satisfied weight of a mission accomplished, all fighting against the neural barriers keeping them locked away. Lucky geography. Jake managed, though the word lucky felt like chewing glass. Lucky like the Proxima incident had been lucky. Lucky like the Titan defense grid had been an accident of stellar engineering rather than the most ruthlessly efficient killing field in human space. Indeed, Cathera's upper eyes narrowed, while her lower ones remained fixed on Jake. Though we wonder if your diplomatic corps might benefit from institutional memory, the perspective of those who understand the cost of the peace they negotiate. She wasn't wrong, and that was the problem. Jake had been part of exactly those conversations, had sat in exactly those strategy sessions where brilliant military minds dissected peace treaties like enemy battle plans, finding every weakness, every exploitable clause, every way a diplomatic solution could be turned into a strategic advantage down the line. The memories pressed against the neural barriers like water against a cracking dam. The irony was delicious in its horror. Here he was, representing Earth's commitment to civilian-led diplomacy, and he was probably the most dangerous person in the room. Every smile he offered was calculated psychological manipulation. Every gesture had been refined through years of intelligence work. Even his breathing pattern was designed to project calm competence while masking predatory awareness. The observation deck's gentle hum shifted slightly, and Jake's enhanced hearing immediately identified the change. Probably atmospheric recycling switching to backup systems. Definitely not a threat, but his body was already shifting into a defensive posture before the implant slammed him back into civilian mode. "Are you quite all right, Representative Morrison?" Ambassador Tulvin inquired with the kind of polite concern that made Jake wonder if the aquatic species had noticed his momentary combat readiness. The collective's diplomatic philosophy emphasized radical transparency, which meant Tulvin probably saw right through every careful lie Jake had been constructed around. "Just admiring the view," Jake replied, gesturing toward the nebula with calculated casualness. "It puts things in perspective." What it actually put in perspective was how many strategic choke points the Nexus system offered, how the asteroid field could be weaponized, and exactly which approach vectors would be most vulnerable to coordinated strikes. His brain was treating one of the galaxy's most beautiful natural phenomena like a tactical simulation, and the worst part was how automatically it happened. The implant pulsed again, stronger now, and Jake felt something crack inside his skull. Not physically, but something deeper, some barrier that had been holding for months starting to fracture under the constant pressure of suppressed instincts. "Tell us," General Vextor continued, his tone carrying the weight of someone who'd probably seen through Jake's performance from the beginning, "what exactly qualifies Earth's civilian negotiators to broker peace between warrior species? What wisdom do shopkeepers and teachers bring to matters of war and peace?" The question was a trap, elegant in its simplicity. Answer honestly, and admit that Earth's civilian diplomats were actually military operatives in disguise. Lie and insult every other species' approach to diplomacy while sounding like a naive idealist. Jake felt another crack in the neural barriers, and suddenly he could taste gunpowder, could feel the weight of command decisions that had saved billions of lives through calculated brutality. The memories were fighting their way to the surface, and the implant was losing the battle to keep them buried. "Perhaps," he said carefully, his voice carrying an edge that definitely wasn't civilian. "The real question is why every other species assumes that understanding violence is necessary for achieving peace." The words hung in the recycled air like a challenge, and Jake realized with growing horror that he'd just revealed far more about himself than Earth's diplomatic protocol allowed. Around the room, alien eyes and sensors focused on him with new interest, and Jake felt the careful construction of his civilian identity beginning to crumble. The implant fired one more time, a desperate attempt to reassert control, but something fundamental had shifted. The barriers were failing, and Jake Morrison the diplomat was about to become Jake Morrison the weapon, whether the galaxy was ready for that truth or not. The emergency session convened 6 hours later, and Jake's implant was now firing error codes that felt like someone was drilling through his skull with a rusty spoon. Every alien representative in the crystalline conference chamber radiated the kind of tension that preceded either breakthrough diplomacy or spectacular warfare, and Jake's deteriorating neural blocks were making it impossible to tell which. "The hegemony grows impatient," General Vextor announced, his claws clicking against the table's surface in what Jake's military training recognized as either nervous energy or a threat display. Without the implant's full suppression, he could read the alien's micro-expressions with disturbing clarity. 3 cycles of negotiation, and still no resolution to the outer rim territorial disputes. Ambassador Kethera's 4 eyes performed their signature cascade blink. "Perhaps if we understood Earth's methodology better, we could find common ground. Your species has achieved remarkable success in conflict resolution." Jake felt his civilian mask slipping like badly applied makeup in a rainstorm. The memories were bleeding through now, fragments of classified briefings about humanity's real diplomatic history. The Titan Accords hadn't been negotiated by civilian diplomats. The Proxima Peace Treaty had been written by the same minds that had designed the orbital bombardment protocols that ended the conflict in the first place. "Our approach is simple," Jake began, his voice carrying undertones that definitely weren't supposed to be there. "We believe that those who understand war's true cost make better advocates for peace." "Fascinating," Tulvin murmured, her aquatic form shifting in the specialized environment suit. "Yet you bring no warriors to these discussions. How does one understand war's cost without soldiers to counsel you? The question hung in the recycled atmosphere like a trap waiting to spring, and Jake felt another neural barrier crack under the pressure. Suddenly, he was remembering the real reason Earth's diplomatic corps was exclusively civilian, at least on paper. He was remembering the horror of watching humanity's greatest military minds dissect peace treaties like enemy battle plans. The truth was ugly in its simplicity. When humans brought military advisors to peace negotiations, they didn't just seek to end conflicts, they sought to end them in ways that provided strategic advantages for future conflicts. Every ceasefire became a redeployment opportunity. Every demilitarized zone became a staging area. Every diplomatic concession was analyzed for its potential to weaken enemies or strengthen human positions decades down the line. It wasn't malicious exactly. It was just how military minds worked, how they'd been trained to work. See every angle, plan for every contingency, turn every apparent weakness into potential strength. The problem was that peace treaties negotiated with that mindset weren't really peace treaties at all. They were just pauses in warfare, intermissions between acts of a longer, more sophisticated form of conquest. Representative Morrison? Cathera's voice seemed to come from very far away. You appear distressed. Jake realized he'd been silent for nearly a minute, lost in the memories that were now flooding through his compromised neural blocks. He could see it all now, the real history of Earth's diplomatic successes. The way every peace agreement had been crafted not just to end immediate conflicts, but to position humanity for maximum advantage when the conflicts inevitably resumed. I'm fine, he lied, though his voice carried the unmistakable edge of someone who'd ordered cities evacuated before orbital strikes. Just considering the complexity of the situation. General Vextor's breathing apparatus hissed in what might have been amusement. Complex indeed. Tell us, Morrison, what would your military advisors counsel in this situation? Hypothetically, of course, since you brought none. The question was a blade slipped between ribs, perfectly placed to expose the lie Jake had been living. Because the truth was that Jake was the military advisor. Every human civilian diplomat was a military advisor, carefully selected and neural modified to appear harmless while retaining all the strategic thinking that made them so effective. Hypothetically, Jake said, his voice dropping into the tone he'd used to brief strike teams, they'd probably suggest that the outer rim disputes aren't really about territory at all. They're about resource control and strategic positioning for future expansion. The hegemony wants the mining rights, but they also want forward bases for whatever comes next. The collective claims environmental protection concerns, but they're really trying to prevent anyone from establishing military presence near their core systems. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either applause or executions. Jake realized he'd just performed the exact kind of analysis that proved why Earth never brought military minds to peace talks. He'd dissected the situation with surgical precision, revealed the hidden motivations behind every diplomatic position, and demonstrated exactly why his species was so good at turning peace negotiations into strategic victories. That's remarkably astute, Tulvin admitted, her translated voice carrying notes of surprise and something that might have been fear. Almost as if you have military training. Jake felt the last of his neural barriers collapse like a dam giving way to floodwaters. The memories crashed through him in waves. 30 years of classified operations, strategic planning sessions, and the growing horror of realizing that humanity's greatest diplomatic achievements were actually its most sophisticated military victories. Here's what I think, Jake said, abandoning any pretense of civilian diplomacy. I think you've all been asking the wrong question. You want to know why Earth doesn't bring military advisors to peace talks? The truth is, we tried it once. Early in our galactic involvement, we sent our best generals alongside our diplomats. You know what happened? He stood up, and every alien in the room instinctively shifted into defensive positions, recognizing predatory movement even across species lines. We won everything. Every negotiation, every treaty, every diplomatic exchange. Our military advisors were so good at analyzing your positions, understanding your strategic needs, anticipating your future moves, that we could craft agreements that gave us exactly what we wanted while making you think you were getting what you needed. Jake began pacing, and his movement patterns were now clearly those of a career soldier, economical and purposeful. The problem wasn't that it didn't work. The problem was that it worked too well. We realized that when you put military strategists in charge of making peace, they don't actually make peace. They make strategic pauses. They create temporary ceasefires designed to maximize long-term advantage. They turn every diplomatic victory into preparation for the next war. The horror of recognition dawned across multiple alien faces. General Vextor's claws had gone completely still. So we made a choice, Jay continued, his voice carrying the weight of species-wide self-awareness. We decided to lobotomize our negotiators. Neural modification, memory suppression, psychological conditioning. We take our best military minds and we surgically remove their ability to think like soldiers. We turn weapons into diplomats by cutting out the parts that make us dangerous. He gestured to his head, where the failing implant was now sending continuous error signals. The only problem is that it's temporary. The modifications break down under stress. The suppressed memories surface, and the weapon remembers what it really is, which is exactly what's happening to me right now. Jake sat back down, and the casual way he moved was somehow more threatening than his pacing had been. So here's the real question you should be asking. Now that you know the truth, now that you understand that every human civilian diplomat is actually a neutered military strategist, what exactly do you think we should do about these outer rim disputes? The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Ambassador Kithera finally spoke. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could explore some alternative approaches to resolution. Jake smiled. It was the first genuine expression he'd worn since entering the station. Now that, he said, sounds like the beginning of an actual peace negotiation.